The country has hotly debated President Obama's gun control actions this week. Small gun sellers need now to have a license. That's what he's proposing. More funding for FBI agents to do background checks and funding for mental health treatment. Now, critics say he's abusing his power and infringing on the Second Amendment. But let's take a look at the points he's calling for, gauge their effectiveness on combating gun violence, not just mass shootings, which sometimes get the most attention, and really the scope of presidential power. That's how I want to kind of narrow this focus here tonight, because I know that we can debate gun control issues for the next hour and a half. So I'm going to give each of you the opportunity to start off and give me your sense now, as we've been able to digest this in the last 2 days, where you think the impact of his proposals are and why you think he came out. Nolan, go ahead and give me your stance first.
Well, very little impact in terms of what he's proposed. I mean, not a single thing he proposed would have prevented Newtown, the example he sort of rode this proposal in on, or any of the other mass shootings. They're very small in terms of their scope, presented in a big way. My problem is less with what he wants to do, with how he wants to do it. You know, he's going to use he's going to use executive orders to restrict constitutional rights, and I don't think as a president he has that authority. These are issues Congress has already weighed in on, so he's acting against the express will of the representative branch. There is no frustration clause in the Constitution. The president can't stand, as he said the other day, and say, well, look, until we get a Congress who will do what I want it to do, I'm going to go ahead and basically be a dictator. I don't think the courts are going to allow this stand. As for the measures themselves,
well, which measure do you think
hang on, let him
beyond Congress?
Hang on, let him finish. I'm going to give you both. Then we're going to go.
That's a good question. I think the whole restriction of Second Amendment rights is not something a president can do by fiat. I think Congress took up this matter, defeated the bill, and for him to say, well, I'm going to ignore
which bill?
The background check expansion specifically, and for him to stand up there and say, I'm going to do this anyway, I don't think we've seen that happen. And this is different than immigration. This is different than energy policy, in that it is a constitutional right. I think he's got an obligation, if this is what he wants, to sell it to Congress. And if this is what the people want and Congress won't do it, our system's set up to allow the people to change their Congress.
All right, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't heard any constitutional scholar suggest that what he's suggesting, that what he wants to do goes beyond any fundamental right that we have. And in fact, what he's talking about doing in principle is enforcing laws that are already on the books, which is totally within his purview. In fact, that's his job as the executive, to make sure that the government performs according to the way that the law says.
You don't need executive orders to force laws.
Okay,
well, but you do, because you're supposed to have background checks on guns, and so expanding them to gun shows is not a fundamental difference. By the way. But they aren't at these gun shows where the private sales take place. You know that there's all kinds of private sales of guns that are not subject to background checks. Those should be. There's not, and that's
but
not.
But the rules inside gun shows and outside gun shows are the same, and I think that's part of the problem here, is all of the misinformation that's been put out sort of to gain support for these bills. There is no gun show loophole.
But there's a private sale loophole.
And there is a private sale loophole, or exemption, if you will.
Well,
but you know,
here's the bigger issue. I think that what the president's doing is, I think it's quite modest. I wasn't.
And it's really nothing new.
It's nothing new at all.
We've heard a lot of these proposals before.
Yeah, we have. But it is, I think, an effort to try to use the bully pulpit somewhat to move the conversation forward, and to say, look, we've got to do some things that we have so far been unwilling to do to try to address this. And what I would hope comes out of this is some effort to move even further, because Nolan's right when he says nothing that he proposed would have stopped the awful mass shootings that he was talking about.
And I think the president agrees with that. The president acknowledges that.
We got to start talking about the things that would prevent.
Well, and I think that's where people start to get a little nervous when you say that this is a step toward bypassing Congress to do all sorts of things in terms of restricting the Second Amendment.
The most important
and that's
thing
what's
he
going
said,
on here.
The most important thing he said was that the Second Amendment is a fundamental right that's in the Constitution, but it is no more important than the other rights. And when Second Amendment rights infringe on the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they're subject to regulation like every other right in the Constitution. And that is absolutely
that's not for the executive branch to determine.
It's absolutely for
we have a representative government here, and I don't think there's anything going on that rises to such a crisis that you can suspend representative government. He's basically suspending the system.
What concerns me about this announcement this week, and it was interesting that you said it, you feel that he brought this up and using it as a bully pulpit to start the conversation. Yeah. My thing is where we are in an election year and a political cycle, and where we are, the distance between two parties right now, that there's no way that there's going to be any kind of substantial conversation or substantial movement on this, and that's what I think is very disappointing.
And he knows that, and my cynical view of this, that it's all about rallying the base ahead of the 2016 election. It's a very divisive issue. It's going to rally both the opponents and the supporters. I think it's all rooted in politics here. But if we want to have substantial changes in gun laws and restrictions on the Second Amendment, that needs to move through the process of government. I don't think the courts are going to let this stand.
What do you think?
I have not heard a single constitutional scholar interpret what he's saying that way. There's nothing. He's not talking about doing anything that's outside the purview of the executive. Because he's not really doing anything
what
here.
He's doing,
he's enforcing
Steve,
laws that are already on the books.
He is implementing a law that Congress already turned down.
Well,
I think that's going to be problematic in the courts. You can't say, well, Congress didn't do this, so I'm going to do it. Or in this case, Congress specifically rejected the measures that he's putting in.
That one narrow issue, maybe they turned down, but the rest of this stuff is garden variety. This is what the president does. Make sure that the government functions the way it's supposed to.
There are also problematic issues in terms of the gathering of mental health records. There are privacy concerns there. There's also problematic measures when you're saying, gosh, if you're on Social Security and you've had some mental health treatment, we're going to either give up your guns or we're not going to send you your check. I don't think that's going to fly.
So the other thing that the president possibly accomplishes here is highlighting how unreasonable one side of this conversation is. The answer always, when you talk about doing anything with regard to gun violence, is you can't do it because the Second Amendment protects my rights to do whatever I want with my gun. That is where the roadblock in this conversation has been for 25 years.
It's absolutely not true. We've layer after layer after layer that Congress has passed regulating gun ownership. Gun ownership is not a wide open prospect in America at all. But when you start getting into the area of saying we are going to withhold your Social Security check, your veterans benefit, if you've had mental health treatment and own a gun, I think you're in real problematic
areas. Or I'm not going to give you a gun. How about that?
In this case, in this proposal, you have to give up your gun.
All right. Well, we're going to see.
Well,
we're going to see how
everybody to give up all.
No, I don't think that.
That's not true.
That's not true. That's not true. All right.